Schopenhauer reveals why intelligent minds prefer solitude. Why do so many of history's brightest thinkers distance themselves from the social world? Why does solitude often accompany brilliance? Is isolation a tragic side effect of intelligence, or could it be a privilege reserved for those who see the world more clearly than most? Arthur Schopenhauer, one of the most profound and pessimistic philosophers of the 19th century, believed that solitude wasn't just an option for the gifted, it was their destiny. In his view, society is filled with shallow distractions, petty conversations, and people driven by base impulses. The more a person rises above this superficiality, the more they are drawn toward isolation. As he once stated, solitude is the lot of all exceptional minds. Was he being dramatic, or did he uncover a hidden truth about human nature? Think about figures like Nikola Tesla, Emily Dickinson, or Isaac Newton. Each left an indelible mark on history, but they also lived much of their lives in solitude. Were they reclusive by choice, or did their intellect set them apart to such a degree that meaningful connection became nearly impossible? Schopenhauer didn't believe solitude was something the intelligent chose. Rather, it was something that chose them. The deeper a person thinks, the harder it becomes to find others who truly understand. As the complexity of one's thoughts increases, the social world begins to feel alien. For those who see life through a broader, more nuanced lens, conventional interactions lose their appeal. In Schopenhauer's eyes, a person can only be truly themselves when alone. To him, if someone fears solitude, they will never know true freedom, because freedom begins with the ability to be alone with one's thoughts. Far from being a punishment, solitude becomes a sanctuary where the intellect can breathe. He viewed society as an oppressive environment for those who think deeply. Social interaction for the average person revolves around status, gossip, and distractions. But for the thinker, these things suffocate curiosity and obscure truth. That's why so many intellectuals throughout history have found themselves increasingly disconnected from everyday social life. Tesla avoided small talk and public events, believing they disrupted his concentration. Nietzsche, a firm believer in the value of isolation, once wrote, "The crowd is a sea in which the free spirit is submerged. But solitude is not without its burdens. Withdrawal from society can breed loneliness, existential anxiety, and alienation." Schopenhauer recognized this paradox. Solitude, while essential for clarity and depth, can also weigh heavily on the soul. Many brilliant minds have suffered depression, not because they were fragile, but because they saw the world in ways most people couldn't begin to grasp. So is isolation a curse or a hidden blessing? Schopenhauer believed it to be a gift. He encouraged the intellectually inclined to embrace their solitude rather than resist it. Only in silence, removed from the noise of mediocrity, could one hope to unlock their highest potential. To him, social life was nothing more than a grand masquerade, a stage where people performed roles and concealed their true selves behind elaborate facades. This pessimistic view was at the heart of his philosophy, especially in The World as Will and Representation, where he argued that our perceptions shape our reality. In this context, social interaction becomes yet another illusion, a performance that distracts us from self-knowledge and deeper understanding. Schopenhauer saw most people as trapped in the pursuit of status, novelty, and shallow approval. To him, the average human was a servant of the will, a blind, irrational force that drives endless desire and keeps us locked in cycles of craving. Seeking social validation, then, was merely another form of enslavement. His disdain for shallow social interaction wasn't unique. Nietzsche, for instance, warned that people cling to comforting beliefs rather than face inconvenient truths. This dissonance between the pursuit of knowledge and the shallowness of public life creates an irreconcilable gap that leaves the thinker isolated. And yet even Schopenhauer acknowledged the emotional risks of prolonged isolation. He warned that those who see beyond society's illusions must be ready to face painful truths and to live with them. It's why many intellectually gifted individuals often feel out of place in social contexts. Their frustration isn't just with small talk, it's with the entire framework of triviality that dominates everyday life. The genius seeks insight, the crowd seeks entertainment, and when these minds try to share their insights, they're often met with confusion or indifference. It's not just a communication gap, it's a difference in purpose. Tesla, Newton, and Einstein all showed disdain for superficial social rituals. Even Einstein, one of the most publicly beloved scientists, admitted he preferred solitude to shallow company. Sometimes this distancing isn't even self-imposed. Society often rejects those who deviate from the norm. Innovative thinkers challenge assumptions and disrupt the comfortable patterns of the majority. Nietzsche called this the resentment of mediocrity, a tendency for the masses to reject what they don't understand, especially if it makes them feel inferior. So how can brilliant minds survive in a world that doesn't understand them? Schopenhauer's answer was philosophical detachment. Instead of trying to fit in or change society, the thinker should step back and become an observer. Watch the world with calm curiosity, not emotional investment. Accept its flaws, acknowledge its limits, and preserve your inner independence. This perspective is echoed in Stoic philosophy. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Give yourself the gift of indifference to what is outside your control. The world may be full of noise, but it's your choice whether to be consumed by it." Total withdrawal isn't necessary. Schopenhauer didn't advocate for complete isolation. He believed in minimal interaction, enough to stay grounded, but not so much that it dulls the edge of one's thoughts. Choose connections carefully, engage strategically, and always protect your mental clarity. In today's age, where digital, noise, fake news, and shallow interactions dominate, this advice feels more relevant than ever. Intelligence isn't just about understanding facts. It's about knowing how to navigate life without losing your authenticity. Rather than mourn the lack of connection with the masses, we can see it as a sign of intellectual freedom. Solitude may be heavy, but it also provides room to grow, to think, to be. So, the real question is, will you conform to a noisy world or preserve your mind by standing apart? If you've followed this far, you've likely felt this tension in your own life. Schopenhauer showed us that solitude isn't simply a side effect of brilliance. It's often the condition that makes brilliance possible. Not because the gifted are arrogant, but because the world can be exhausting for those who see too deeply. If this resonates with you, support our work by liking and subscribing. Let's continue exploring the ideas that shape the mind and liberate the soul. Solitude has always served as both a shelter and a forge, a space where minds are hardened against the trivial and shaped toward the eternal. In solitude, the thinker is not merely alone, they are free to investigate the depths of thought, free to cultivate insight, and free to remain untouched by the tide of collective distraction. But this freedom is not easily born. It can isolate and weigh heavily, especially for those who still long for a sense of belonging. The paradox, as Schopenhauer noted, is that to remain true to oneself, one may need to accept the burden of not belonging. And this, perhaps more than any other lesson, is the price of intellectual freedom. So, to the ones who walk alone, not out of arrogance but out of necessity, know that solitude is not the absence of connection, but the presence of authenticity. It is the space in which the soul breathes, the intellect sharpens, and the truth reveals itself. What few acknowledge is that heightened perception comes at a cost. To see more clearly is also to feel more deeply, both the beauty and the absurdity of existence. The intellectually gifted are not merely more knowledgeable, they are more sensitive to contradictions, to suffering, to the artificiality embedded in everyday life. The mind that perceives truth often finds little comfort in a world that prefers illusion. This cognitive burden explains why, for many thinkers, social withdrawal is not a luxury. It's a form of self-preservation. In the company of noise, clarity is lost. In a sea of superficial chatter, the profound becomes inaudible. Thus, the retreat into solitude becomes not only a choice, but a means of survival, an act of quiet defiance against the trivialization of the human experience. Still, there is a crucial difference between being lonely and being alone. Loneliness is the longing for others. Aloneness is the presence of oneself. Schopenhauer made this distinction clear. The intellectually independent individual is not necessarily antisocial, but rather inwardly rich enough that external validation is no longer a requirement for inner peace. In fact, this aloneness often allows for a more authentic form of connection. The few relationships that are cultivated from this space of inner completeness are often deeper, more meaningful, unclouded by neediness or social pretense. In such rare connections, minds meet rather than masks. In today's hyper-connected world, the noise is no longer just around us, it's within us. Notifications, endless scrolling, and algorithmic stimulation create a mental environment where reflection is almost impossible. In this landscape, the kind of solitude Schopenhauer described is not merely beneficial, it's revolutionary. Choosing stillness in an age of distraction is an act of rebellion. Choosing thought over reaction, depth over immediacy, is how the modern thinker carves a path back to meaning. It's how intelligence defends itself in a world that increasingly commodifies attention and rewards conformity. One of Schopenhauer's most enduring insights is the emphasis on maintaining one's intellectual integrity in the face of social pressure. In a world that often rewards alignment with prevailing norms, it requires courage to remain steadfast in one's convictions. This is especially true when those convictions isolate rather than include, when they demand that one say what is unpopular, or worse, remain silent in the face of mass noise. To the intelligent, the temptation to conform is not always about status or approval. It's about ease. It's easier to nod along, to speak in cliches, to withhold the truth in favor of harmony. But the price of this is steep. The erosion of one's clarity, the dulling of one's philosophical edge. Schopenhauer would argue that the thinker must resist this, not out of stubbornness, but out of fidelity to the truth. Detachment in this sense is not apathy. It is discipline. It is the art of seeing the world with open eyes but refusing to be consumed by it. The detached thinker does not ignore reality, nor does he escape it. He acknowledges it fully and still chooses to remain inwardly sovereign. This detachment also allows for strategic engagement. Rather than being swept into every argument, every cultural wave, or every passing controversy, the disciplined mind engages only when it matters, when the exchange has meaning, when the conversation has depth. Everything else is noise, and noise is not worth the price of inner stillness. Silence, often feared by the average person, is revered by the philosopher. Schopenhauer saw silence not as a void, but as fertile ground. In silence, thoughts have room to unfold and truths previously drowned out can be heard. Silence isn't just the absence of noise, it's the presence of something else, awareness. In this way, solitude and silence become not a prison, but a temple. They are spaces where the individual can confront themselves without the camouflage of society. This confrontation is often uncomfortable, but it is also the source of all genuine growth. For Schopenhauer, solitude was more than a condition. It was a philosophical practice. Much like the Stoics trained themselves to remain unaffected by external chaos, he believed that the cultivated mind should regularly withdraw, not just from society, but from its internalized expectations. This self-imposed exile was not born of disdain, but of necessity. In solitude, the thinker could reorient themselves toward what matters: truth, clarity, and internal coherence. It's not surprising, then, that Schopenhauer's concept of solitude closely mirrors spiritual retreats found in Eastern traditions. In Buddhist monastic life, for example, extended silence and isolation are not seen as deprivation, but as purification. The external world, with all its noise and distraction, is seen as a veil, one that must be lifted for deeper insight to emerge. Schopenhauer absorbed this lesson deeply and translated it into a Western context. He saw the withdrawal from society not as rejection, but as refinement. Throughout history, some of the most profound contributions to art, literature, and science have come from minds working in isolation. This is not a coincidence. When removed from the expectations and judgments of society, the individual can pursue ideas to their fullest depth. There is no need to dilute a vision to make it more palatable. There is no pressure to simplify a thought to fit into conversation. Solitude grants space, mental, emotional, and temporal, for ideas to flourish without interference. In the quiet, there is time for contemplation, iteration, and creative risk. This is why many of the greatest thinkers and creators structured their lives around solitude, not as a retreat, but as a prerequisite for mastery. Today's culture prizes visibility. Presence on social media, participation in trends, and constant social proof are seen as indicators of value. But Schopenhauer's legacy reminds us that the deepest value often lies in what is unseen. The solitude of the thinker is not absence, it is resistance. It is the decision to build quietly while the world clamors for attention. This choice to step back, to think deeply rather than react quickly, is countercultural. It requires strength, but it also opens the door to a different kind of life, one rooted not in popularity, but in purpose, not in connection at any cost, but in meaning that endures. One of the most underappreciated burdens of high intelligence is the weight of awareness. For the average person, many contradictions and injustices in the world pass unnoticed or are rationalized with simplistic explanations. But for the intellectually acute, these contradictions are not only visible, they're often inescapable. The clarity of their perception exposes them to a more vivid understanding of suffering, hypocrisy, and existential uncertainty. This expanded awareness can become isolating. When your observations continually clash with societal norms or collective delusions, it's easy to feel like an outsider, not because you wish to be, but because your mind refuses to accept the surface-level stories most live by. In that sense, solitude becomes a refuge from cognitive dissonance, a space where integrity is preserved. Another reason the intelligent may retreat lies in the values society rewards. Schopenhauer argued that society is often structured to celebrate conformity, charisma, and superficial charm rather than depth of thought or originality. In such an environment, intelligence can become a liability. Insightful people may find that their ideas, though true or profound, are too disruptive or unsettling to be welcomed. This dissonance between what is valuable and what is validated leads many to disengage. They stop trying to be understood by a society that rewards spectacle over substance. Instead, they turn inward, choosing solitude not out of bitterness, but out of fidelity to their own standards of meaning. But this fidelity comes at a cost. To see the world clearly often means to experience it painfully. There is a certain grief that accompanies lucidity, a grief born from watching people chase illusions, from recognizing patterns of self-destruction in culture, from knowing how much more life could be if only others saw what you see. This emotional isolation can deepen into despair if not properly managed. Many thinkers have walked that tightrope between insight and alienation, and not all have escaped unscathed. But those who learn to carry the weight with grace, who accept solitude as a condition rather than a sentence, often become society's most enduring voices. To endure solitude without succumbing to despair, the intelligent must learn to cultivate inner richness. This means developing not only intellectual faculties, but emotional depth, aesthetic sensitivity, and a reverence for the subtle beauties of life. It is through this cultivation that solitude transforms from a void into a sanctuary, from exile into empowerment. Reading, creating, reflecting, and observing become forms of nourishment. Nature, art, philosophy, and music offer companionship, more profound than small talk ever could. In solitude, one learns to hear the quiet music of life, to recognize the sacred in the ordinary, and to trace the intricate web of existence that connects all things, even while standing apart. Importantly, Schopenhauer's philosophy does not suggest that the intelligent must live in absolute seclusion. Rather, they must learn to connect without conforming, to engage without surrendering their clarity. This requires discernment, knowing when to speak and when silence is wiser, when to listen and when to walk away. Meaningful relationships are still possible, but they are rare, built not on shared trends or mutual distraction, but on resonance, on shared values, shared questions, and mutual respect for the inner world of the other. When such connections are found, they shine all the brighter in contrast to the noise. In the end, Schopenhauer's message is one of liberation. Freedom, for the thinking individual, does not come from societal approval or a crowded room. It comes from the radical acceptance of one's solitude, the embracing of one's difference, and the commitment to living authentically, even when the cost is misunderstanding or exclusion. To walk alone, eyes open, is not to be lost. It is to be awake.